Congratulations, everyone. Roll tape.
Dead Air Live presents a special discussion on Eckankar, the religion of the light and sound of God. Our special guests are Doug White, head cleric for Eckankar, Massachusetts, and fellow Eckankar clergy members Mark Lopatuski, Becky Williams, and Rob Acevedo. The topic of discussion is the road to God.
In 3, 2, 1.
Good evening. Welcome to our discussion tonight. My name is Doug White, and our discussion tonight is on Eckankar, the religion of the light and sound of God. The discussion title is The Road to God. This is Rob Acevedo, Becky Williams, Mark Lopatuski. We're all clergy members of the clergy in Eckankar in Massachusetts. Eckankar is a recent religion, I guess you could say. It started in 1965 by a gentleman named Paul Twitchell. And today it has its current headquarters in Minneapolis. Eckankar is charted all around the world, all 50 states, United States, and around the world. Key to Eckankar is it offers spiritual tools to individuals. It's an individual path that you can use to develop your own relationship with God, whatever that may be. We're going to talk about a few different things tonight, different themes in Eckankar, and have a little music. And we hope that you'll enjoy this. It's for people of any faith, by the way. I think anybody can find something useful here in their spiritual toolbox. I thought we'd open our discussion on, I was listening to somebody talk about the word karma the other day, and they were talking about how karma is a bad thing. And I wondered about that. Why do people think that karma has a negative connotation? And what does it have to do with us spiritually?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think first off, people think karma is bad because they just relate it to things. When things go wrong, that's karma. But when things are good, they don't think of that as karma. They're only seeing half the picture. You know?
Right.
And
yeah, and I've actually learned, it's taken me a long time to learn this, but usually when something's going wrong, it's an opportunity for me to learn something spiritually. And I learned to reframe the situation from that perspective, and that really helps.
Oh, yeah.
And just to back up a little bit, this idea of karma is one in which people, well, we've come to understand it, I should say, as being the principle of for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, the scientific way, or also known in religious literature as you reap what you sow. Or another common way to put it is that what goes around comes around. And I think it's a principle that people recognize in everyday life, that somehow there's a balancing effect that takes place. And I think what we try to teach in Eckankar is to be conscious, to be responsible, and to know that what goes out is going to come back. And therefore, if we put out the best spiritually, then that will come back to us.
And I think also, too, along the lines of what does it mean spiritually, for me, it's, an eye for an eye, for tooth, what you reap, what you sow is very, I don't know, mechanical, if that's the right word, but I look at it as opportunities to grow, too, no matter what it is. So there's a loving presence behind it all. It's not just this flat, you do this, you get this, total. And because of that, I've learned through my experiences in life to gain some more compassion for things, and to have more love in my life. And I think that's a benefit of karma.
It's interesting because oftentimes I think we actually recognize what our karma is, but we resist it because, it's how many times when we've had opportunities present themselves that we resist the change because, it's the unknown that we're really afraid of. Mm-hmm. But almost invariably that if something is necessary that you need to go through, it'll revisit you, It could be a relationship, it could be the boss, it could be, any of a number of things. But when you end up finally going through with the change, things improve because, and if it is something that is important, it will come back to you, and you'll recognize it as such, because it's not going to go away. So karma is a very interesting thing that is two sides to it. That it can be the harbinger of something important in your life.
Absolutely. It's usually a big turning point. It's like the red flag or the sign from God. This is a turning point in your life, and there's something here spiritually.
I think you had mentioned at the beginning we have tools for everyone, and we have spiritual exercises that we do as one of the tools. And what they do is help us to gain a spiritual perspective. Whereas, when these big things come up and they keep coming around, we start to say, what do I have to learn from this, rather than why is this happening to me? And so we gradually learn to move out of the victim consciousness, you could say, into more taking charge of our lives.
One time I was traveling, and I was in Europe, and I went to Germany, and I was staying at a friend's flat in Germany, and when I got there I was really exhausted. You know how sometimes travel does that to you. So we went out to eat, and while we were sitting in this little pub, it was an Italian restaurant actually in Munich, and we were sitting there, and the people across the way from us were talking about Americans. And they weren't saying nice things, by the way, but I was getting really tired, and I was falling asleep. And finally the meal came, and I woke up. And I said to my friend, have you been listening to what they're saying? And he said, yeah. He says, matter of fact, I think it's very rude. I said, well, it seems kind of strange they'd be talking about that with me sitting here. And then I said to him, and why are they speaking in English? And he said, they're not speaking in English. And I thought that was so strange, because I don't speak German. And so, I thought, well, could it be that this is something from before that I knew on some level? Because I actually knew what they were talking about. How does karma work in with past lives? And are we able to learn how to perceive that, to make that connection?
I recently was reading a story in one of the many books that Eckankar has to offer. The name of the book is Earth the God, Come In Please. And the first chapter in there is called Checkers, and it's a story about a couple of kids who around Christmas time was asked what do they want for Christmas, and a little 6-year-old girl said checkers, and she had a 3-year-old brother, and he also wanted this game. And they said, well, why do you want this game? You don't even know how to play. Oh, we know how to play. We used to play it before when we were big. What do you mean when you were big? Well, we used to be old, older than you are now. And so they figured, this is unusual, so they set up a checkers game for them. And sure enough, they knew how to play. So they asked them some more questions about, well, what was it like before? Oh, well, we used to be married. And it turned out, as they looked into this, that they knew someone who had passed away, not from this life, but they had known him before in their previous life. And so it's very interesting how sometimes these stories come about and are kind of can be an eye-opening experience for people.
I've heard people sometimes in their dreams they connect kind of on some super level of past lives, and maybe you have a recurring dream that connects. And anybody ever have that experience where they were able to connect with dreams to something that was before, or got an insight into it?
I actually did. I was traveling in Japan for business many years ago, and I took a weekend trip to Kyoto. And when I was staying in the hotel that night, I had a dream of my past life as living in one of the temples in Kyoto. And it was interesting that I had to go all the way back, in this particular circumstance. I was actually in the physical location and had this dream.
Yeah. One of the key things about Eckankar is that it teaches that our true self is soul, and soul is eternal. Soul doesn't die, and that we have all experienced many different lifetimes. Now that may not be somebody's experience in this lifetime, and that's perfectly fine. As a matter of fact, whatever your philosophical or religious perspective is, those things are important. and they have everything to do with somebody's ability to relate to God and to communicate with God. Dreams are an interesting study because it sometimes allows you to connect on a higher level that isn't accessible during your day-to-day life. And I know one of the things that I find fascinating about the study of dreams is that if you keep a dream journal and you write down your dreams, you start to notice a trend of symbols and impressions. And once you start to identify those, you can postulate what they might mean. You may not get it right, but eventually if you do, you can actually develop your own dictionary, I'll say, with God, because these things will start to appear in your daily life. And those coincidences that happened. I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about that, about learning how we develop our language with God.
I have a wonderful story that you're reminding me of. Many years ago, I had been working in this one business. I had been there for so many years, and I knew it was time to go. And I really wanted to start my own business, but I was afraid to make the change. We talked about how, we can be so afraid of something new and different and making that leap. And then through a change of personnel, I suddenly had a new boss at this job, and he and I did not get along at all. And it appeared very adversarial on the surface. And it was making life pretty miserable for me to go into work every day. And then I happened to be looking through my dream journal. And I do this, I go back, sometimes months later and read through the dreams, and it's so interesting how I have a better perspective when I go back later to look. And I saw this dream that I had had with this man, and I hadn't paid any attention to it because I really didn't even know him at the time. I just knew that he worked in the same building I did. And in the dream, we were walking down a hallway at the office, and he put his arm around my shoulder and he said, "You know why I'm here, don't you?" And I said, "No." And he said, "I'm here to get you free, to get you out of here." And it was such a loving dream, and he was so nice. and it just struck me, see, this really showed me how love is behind everything in life. And on the surface, it looked like a really bad situation. But here, based on the law of love, was this situation to help free me.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just thinking too, with the dreams is, and the dream journal is, it puts us in a state where we're more relaxed, so things can come through. Whereas we're in our waking life, sometimes we have a lot of tensions built in, and we're not as receptive. And sometimes that happens when we're in contemplations too. And it's really key to be relaxed, because I know for myself, once I started writing a dream journal, before I very rarely remembered dreams, but once I started doing that, I started remembering them a lot better and started seeing things in them. And so that's a key. And just, if I don't get the answer right away I'm looking for, it doesn't really matter, because it's going to come. If it's important enough, it's like you said, these things always come back, and it will come back, and I'll get it sometime or another. So it takes the pressure off in a way, I don't have to know this right now, or I know the Spirit will provide, provide an answer.
There's a saying, going with the flow in life. I think sometimes recognizing what exactly is the flow is one of the biggest parts of knowing how to go with it. Because oftentimes the things that we need to learn are lessons that aren't as easy. Some are easier, some aren't as easy. I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about spiritual exercises, What kind of spiritual exercises do we find? Now, spiritual exercises is a term that we've heard of in Eckankar, but basically what it is that you find a way for yourself to make that connection with God, or with a sense of the sacred, or your life's purpose. And there's so many ways to do it. We're going to talk about singing Hugh later on. But what about the spiritual exercises and how you guys have made connections with life?
I would say for myself, the benefit I get out of doing spiritual exercises, and like you said, there's different ways of doing it, and it's unique to everyone. And the ones I resonate with is singing words like the Hugh. It's similar to mantras used in other religions, the way it's done. And contemplative exercises where they're like visualizations. And for me, the main benefit of doing these over many years is I noticed my spiritual, my inside spiritual energy, I guess is the best way I can explain it, the positive in me has grown. And as it grows, then there's less room for the negative, and there's like this struggle that happens, and then it manifests in the world as, you know, something difficult to go through. But then eventually, as you keep doing this, the positive for me, it seems like it wins out. And it's such a natural process. It's not the will of the mind saying I have to do this. It's just these things fall away. These negative traits after a while. You know, I could think of a few, but it'd probably take too much time for this discussion. But suffice it to say that it's really been a big benefit to me. You know, and I have just a quick story of a friend of mine who was in a relationship, and he does these same types of spiritual exercises. And he was mentioning to me once that he and his wife, it seemed like they were always arguing. And then one day, it was like a big epiphany. He realized, you know, I don't have to argue. And before that, he was stuck in this place where he was always reacting to what she said. And he reached a degree of inner freedom by realizing he had a choice. And spiritual freedom, I think, that's one aspect of spiritual freedom. And it's, personally, I can't think of anything more valuable in this world than something like that, to realize you have a choice. And it gives you a peace inside to know that you have that.
Recently, we came into Boston with my wife and my son, and we went to the Museum of Fine Arts. And we saw the display on, I think it's John Singleton Copley, and you know, Copley Square was named after him. And he did portraits of Paul Revere. There's a very famous one by Paul Revere, and John Hancock, to name a couple. But I was thinking about Paul Revere and his ride. And of course the streets of Boston and the streets of Worcester, where I come from, right? And it's very interesting to people who come to Massachusetts, because the streets don't go in a straight line, you know. But you know, it's because that the streets were created out of necessity of bringing carts, you know, oxen and cattle along their way, go around the river or around the stream. And these became the streets of Boston and of Massachusetts. And I think that's a very interesting idea, and there's also a metaphor there with how soul works too. And you guys are going to play a song, right, for us? Mm-hmm. Okay, so maybe you guys can set up the song while we're finishing this. But, you know, it occurred to me that while they were talking about Paul Revere's ride, that, you know, if you go to other places, the streets are laid out straight because they planned the city. But oftentimes our lives flow along their own course.
You know, something that Mark said earlier about being relaxed as a way of getting in tune with ourselves inwardly and our spiritual connection reminded me of an incident that happened. My wife and I have 2 young girls, and we've been teaching them the spiritual exercises and how to work with them and how to be open to their dreams. They keep dream journals, how to you know, to be aware that they've lived other lives. And it was interesting that my daughter, who was I think 8 years old at the time, had an experience in which she was listening to music, children's music from another place, and then she remembered a past life being a boy in Africa and dancing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, this song that Becky and Mark are going to play has a lot to do with that idea. It's called How Do You Find God? And so, Becky, Mark.
Searching only for the higher ground, I miss the ferns and wild hollyhock. 6,000 feet of mountain, I hurry to the very top. I cry out to the valley below, but only hear my echo asking a white feather chanced to pass, caught in the beauty of its motion, I slip between the crack. Now I am that feather, light as air, and God is everywhere. In the bird and tree, the air I breathe, the weave of the tapestry. Were you so close I could not see? Now I see. How do you, how do you, how do you find God? How do you, how do you, how do you find bird and tree, the air I breathe, the weave of a tapestry, sunrise at dawn, fresh roast is on, bluebird sings a morning song, sky deep blue, singing the hue of friends whose hearts are strong and true. Tucker and Max snuggled in my lap, curling up for an afternoon nap. How do you find God? How do you, how do you, how do you find God?
Wow. You know, it's interesting listening to the lyric in there, and how do we find God? How do you find God? That I think that the deeper we go into our lives, that the more we start to appreciate things. I mean, how did we know our mom and dad really had our best interests at heart, you know, until later on after they're gone, or you get old enough to understand what it means. Maybe you have children yourself. I work at a college in Worcester, and it's interesting. I was having a discussion with one of the professors there, and I was doing a workshop on past lives, dreams, and soul travel, and he thought this was the funniest thing he ever heard. You know, he just cracked him up, and he thought that was kind of ridiculous. And I think he's maybe on the atheist side. I'm not real sure, but we started having a discussion about the nature of things, and he said to me that he was of the mind that the whole universe was created by this big bang, and, you know, gases came together. And I thought, well, could be, you know, that sounds plausible. I said, but then I asked him, well, what made the gases? And he laughed, and he said, you have a good day, and he walked away, you know. And I think it's interesting how it's so important that we respect other people's understanding of God. And even someone who doesn't have a belief in God still has a consciousness, and that's a valid relationship with life, whatever you want to call it. One of the more unique things, though, I find about people who are spiritually searching is that life reveals itself to them, and they'll have creative outlets, you know, that they will do something that life expresses itself through them. And everybody has that ability. I remember one woman saying to me one time that she felt bad because she wasn't able to take time to contemplate or meditate, to make that communion with God that she so dearly loved. And I said, well, what's different now? She said, well, you know, I'm a new mom, and I spend all my time with my infant child now, and which is very rewarding. She says, I wouldn't have it any other way. And after listening to her, it occurred to her and to me that her spiritual exercise was being a mom. And I find that sometimes it really is that simple. And half of the difficulty we have in spiritual unfoldment is recognizing how simple and simply available it is to us, but recognizing it. And I think that's where having a guide or having a teacher or having some teachings that you can follow and work with, whatever they may be. Of course, Eckankar has these things, discourses, and we have a spiritual leader, the living Eckmaster, Harold Klemp, and he's in Minneapolis and has many writings and tapes that are available for people. I thought maybe right now, though, we could talk a little bit about the sound current and how we make the connection. There's an analogy that I like to use where if you take a tuning fork and you ping it and you hold it up to another one, right, what happens?
It starts to vibrate with
the other one
original
vibrates.
force,
And the same thing is true with us, that when we make that connection. And one great way to do it is by singing the sacred names of God. And one good one is the word hue. Hue is like the sound behind sounds. It's that insight into when seasons change. And I thought maybe we could maybe sing that a little bit right now, just to demonstrate how singing hue. And basically the way this works is you just sit down, get comfortable, place your attention somewhere like where your imagination, your screen, it's been called, the Tisratil or the third eye or your imagination word, but basically you just simply relax and put your attention where images form. And then with love, sing this song through, 3 or whatever length of time you're comfortable with, and then listen and see what comes through. So maybe we can just demonstrate that.
Sure.
So relax, close your eyes, and begin.
We invite you to spend the next half hour with Sri Harold.
So that's the idea. By seeing this word, maybe before you go to sleep at night, you can have an experience that you can write down. And following this presentation now, we're going to have another presentation for people to listen to. And we hope you've enjoyed this presentation for you tonight on Eckankar. Eckankar.org is a place to find out more information. Thank you.
Giving out the teachings of the light and sound of God.
Lessons and blessings. These come in various ways, and sometimes there's a lesson and a blessing packed in the same experience. Joan and I were at a grocery store shopping, and I just saw the skateboarders outside skating around, and they were just dashing here and there in the traffic and not paying a whole lot of attention. When you're young, you don't worry about a whole lot of things. But Joan, then I went and did some other things in the store yet, but Joan happened to be outside then. And she watched the whole thing, and she said, I saw the inside part of this, and she saw the outside part, so I'll just combine things. Management saw that the 3 skateboarders were putting the store's customer at risk And so management asked one of the employees to go out there and just nicely ask them not to be skateboarding anymore right there. And so she came out and said it to them very nicely. And when she turned back to go into the store, the leader of them, he kind of looked around and almost with a sneer, and he, so what is she gonna do to us? And the next instant, his hands flew up in the air and he fell flat on his brains. Yeah, on his seat. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the helmet was on his head. Of course, he jumped up quick as a whip and he dusted himself off, and very embarrassed, that his buddies should see his downfall like that. Jumped on his skateboard and then he went tooting off, to greater worlds, I suppose, in his own imagination, because for sure there wasn't much going on in his world right now. He was pretty much a loser. Well, the blessing is that he didn't hurt his brains. And the lesson was, for us maybe, that karma is of our own doing. So when he went flip-flopping all over like a fish out of the water in a boat, he was just paying himself back real quick. You can call it the law of karma, the law of cause and effect or whatever, as if it's some great law that works rather arbitrarily, but it doesn't. For the most part, on the daily karma level, it dishes back what we dish out. So if you dish out ice cream, you get ice cream back. And if you dish out, some bitter drink, well, that's what you get back. Well, karma may jump right in there and do it for you right then, balance the books and that score. Or it may take its time because it sees, you're wearing padding in the wrong place, and so what good does it do, And wait a little while, wait till the guy is more exposed, and then get him. Yeah, there is good karma. Often when we say about someone, it's his karma, well, the feeling isn't, the understanding is it's bad karma. Karma is bad. Always bad. Always bad. Karma is bad. Like so. But it isn't at all. Because when we see someone who's enjoying the fruits of doing well, doing good in some arena of his life, then often what's the reaction? The reaction is, some people are born with all the luck. Jealousy and envy creep right in there. But if somebody's having a bad time, we say, well, he got what he deserved. It's his karma. So whether you're good or whether you're bad, you can't win if you've got a critic who doesn't have a good spiritual understanding of himself. Well, so much for the skateboarder. Lessons and blessings. Kathy is from Alabama, and she has a finch at home, and a finch is a nice songbird. There are many different kinds. But Kathy was getting ready for a workshop on change. And so the master was going to give her a real good example of change right in her home there. Well, Patchy, the finch, her male finch, most of the time he spends his effort trying to make the family nest more comfortable for his wife, Buffy. So it's Patchy and Buffy, Mr. and Mrs. Finch. And so one particular day he was pulling at the netting on his, around his cage. He was trying to take this and add to the softness of the nest, make it nicer and nicer. You know how we do. We've got a nice home, a car, a couple TVs, and a couple of computers, and on the internet and everything else, but somehow we want more. We want more netting. So he pulled at this for a while, and of course he isn't going to break that off. And then he saw a piece of a newspaper sticking up from beneath his cage, from the bars down there, and so he goes pulling at that, and he didn't have any luck with that either. So Kathy looked at him and she thought, well, I'm going to humor him. So she gets a napkin, a paper napkin. She takes her scissors and she cuts it into a bunch of real fine shreds and hangs it over the bars of his cage. Well, one or two of the shreds, they, kind of fell down into the cage so that, she thought, wow, Patchy's going to be over here right away. Grab that stuff and slap it in the nest and make everything really homey. But there was a whole different reaction. What does Patchy do? He goes against the far corner of his cage and he starts singing his song, his "This is my territory" song. And so he was afraid to come, but of course he's going to attack that strange thing that had just now come to that had come into his world, his well-ordered world. So he gets all set to charge, runs up to the side where the little strips of napkin are hanging, the shreds, and he gets within 12 inches. And there was right a line in the sand, sort of, where his courage failed him. So he goes back to the far end of the cage and he sits there. And all of a sudden he comes charging out again, and again, and again, and again. He could get as close as anywhere from 12 inches, all as close as 8 inches, but that was it. And one of these shreds was hanging down a little bit farther than the others, and so he finally makes a dash, gets up there, grabs a hold of the napkin, pulls at it, and runs back to his corner again and studies the whole thing and determines, well, the thing didn't move. Didn't attack me, it didn't do any of that stuff. It's just sitting there. Maybe it's okay. So Patchy gets all his courage up again, resting in the fighter's corner like boxers do, and then his courage pushed him out there in his resolution. He goes scooting out there, goes back, grabs that shred again, and it comes floating down just like a fluffy feather. In 5 minutes' time, he had cleaned up the shreds, plastered them into the nest, and his world was back in order. You know, this is neither here nor there, and really is neither here nor there. As we were coming here, I was talking to Joan. I said, you know, way back in the Middle Ages, and you know, the topic here is, what sort of God do people make for themselves? Like maybe Patchy had made his own God in the corner, a thing too fearful to be faced or to be reckoned with. You know, we make gods out of the most foolish things, but we do it. We make God in our own image. Well, during the early Middle Ages, the tallest buildings and the biggest and strongest, most magnificent were the castles. This is where the lords lived. And they had life and death power over their serfs. So the castles were the largest and most well-appointed buildings in those times. And then a little later, the power of the church arose because the clergy in the Middle Ages was even acting as advisors to emperors. Emperors stood on top, then the clergy were in there, and then the nobles came under them, and then on and on and on down through the hierarchy. And so, of course, the cathedrals and everything else were testimony almost to the power of the church. Then I told Joan, I said, and you wonder what people have made as their God today. The biggest and tallest buildings are commercial buildings. Have people made money their God? You know, it's neither here nor there, but I began to wonder, how much do people worship money and the things that it can buy? You know, it's not money that's evil, it's the desire. It's that desire. That desire for it, the kind that's overwhelming. Deborah from New York tells of meeting Bill. He's a bioengineer professor, and Liz, his 11-year-old daughter. Both had sleep disorders. Bill had trouble getting to sleep at night, and when he did sleep, he slept poorly. He was always on edge. Liz, his daughter, was a sleepwalker. So here you got dad and daughter both having problems with sleep. So Deborah told him about singing Hugh, and when he got home, he told his daughter about how to sing Hugh to calm things down. Now, Bill's belief system had been that when you die, that's the end of it. You're gone like a puff of smoke. Poof, you're gone. The life you lived here has no more significance than if someone were blowing a puff of smoke out of his mouth from smoking a cigarette. Just gone. And so this scared him. It always scared him. He wondered, you know. He said, there's got to be more than this. But then worse, he felt, was that he was passing on this legacy of fear to his daughter, and that's why she was sleepwalking. One day, he mentioned his sore neck. Deborah said to him, has it ever occurred to you that it could be from a past life? You know, a lot of us have in the past had some problems with the powers that be, and in this lifetime then, you know, suffered neck pains and all the like, and wondered, well, where's that from? Well, it came from hanging around the wrong places, like trees and things. And scaffolds. Or sometimes it came, you know, from the executioner's blade, you know, all those cheery things. Somehow we cross the powers that be, and then in this lifetime, ooh, my neck hurts. So what does Bill do? He's the one who doesn't want to pass on this fear of legacy to his daughter Liz. So what does he do? He goes home and tells Liz, because he tells her, and then he thinks, boy, this will really scare her. I'm wondering, is he really not trying to pass along this legacy, or does he purposely feed negative stuff like this to her so to pass it along, to make sure, you know, it takes root and grows strong, you know? Well, she seemed delighted. For some reason, it rang a bell inside her, like she knew it was true. There was something to this past life. So anyway, they do the hue and everything, and Deborah said, you do the technique to sing hue when you're trying to go to sleep. You know, just imagine an open door and walk through it. And it was a good beginning, because now Bill could fall asleep. At least he could fall asleep. Of course, then he woke up in the middle of the night, wide awake as ever. And that bothered him, except there was one benefit that hadn't been there before. If there was something that had been puzzling him, he now saw the answer to it. This is something that hadn't happened before. So as I say, it was a good beginning, but of course then he'd have a ways more to go. Now his daughter, she did this hue technique too. She walked through the door and she began having these wonderful dreams where she slept. She'd sleep completely through, sometimes, you know, for hours. And it was just pleasant. And so the first time this happened, the father, he sends an email to Deborah and he said, you know, it works. You know, she's having really good dreams. And then apparently Liz had a dream where she was snowboarding, from skateboarding to snowboarding, okay? She's going down the hill on a board, and she goes down and she said, it was so real. It was more real than things out here, and it was just a lot of fun. Well, Deborah says, if you'd like to try to repeat the experience tonight, what you can do is do that again, but take my dog with you. invite my dog to go along. Next morning, Deborah gets another email from Bill, and he said, Liz did just as you said, invited your dog, and everything in that experience, in that soul travel experience, was exactly the same, except your dog was running down the hill with her. And of course, soul travel, Bill understood this, when Deborah had explained it. It's you living and being aware, in full awareness, at a finer level of existence that you already are at. And so this was quite an experience for both father and daughter, and the lessons were good here too. They learned to play the Hugh CD. They said, that's worth it, and then they chant Hugh every night. So, lessons and blessings. Silas is a doctor there, in Nigeria, and he was at his desk. It was about 11:30 in the evening at night, and he was reading Paul Twitchell's The Flute of God. And then suddenly the blue star of the Mahanta sparked on the page. But this happened a lot when he was reading the Ek materials. And then he turned the page, and the blue light sparked again. This was very unusual, because usually it just sparked one time. So all of a sudden, he gets this urge, very strong urge, to go into his sitting room. So he leaves his office, goes into the sitting room. When he gets there at 11:30 at night, he hears this strange sound coming from the ceiling. Something was wrong. He knew it. There was danger. So right away, he called an electrician who lives nearby, and in a few minutes the electrician was there. He went into the room, looked at the ceiling when he heard the sound, and he ran out right away and he threw the master switch. And then he crawled up into the attic, and he poked around in there, I think, for a good 15 minutes before he came down. And he said a rat had bitten through electrical wires up there. It had electrocuted the rat. 2 wires had touched together, and the insulation on the cord was slowly melting. And so that more and more of this wire was being exposed and would soon come in contact with combustible material. And he said within a very short time, a matter of minutes, of 15 minutes from when I got here, there would be a fire. And it probably would have had very serious consequences for you and your family. And then the electrician said, "Doctor, go to church and give thanksgiving." But Silas said silently to himself, "The Mahanta's protection." The Master's timely warning had spared him and his family from almost certain tragedy. So the lesson is here. Some people say, well, the I never hear Mahanta. They may hear, but they ignore because they won't listen to the nudges and promptings that are from a true source. Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming. It's a joy for me to be here with you. Many of you have jumped through hoops, hung over burning fires just to get here. But you did it. And I'm grateful that we've had this chance to be together. And I wish you the very best on your way home. And my love to you and all of yours. May the blessings be. Thank you.